Is the camera even on? I can never tell if this camera is on or not. Anyway, I hope the camera's on. If the camera is not on, I will speak loudly so you can hear me wherever you are. All right. Everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown. All 3 books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Now today I am going to be ranking my top 10 fantasy worlds. That's right, world building is a huge thing in fantasy books. I mean, if you are writing or reading fantasy, if you're writing fantasy and you don't have a big map of your fantasy world, why are you even bothering writing fantasy? If you're reading a fantasy book and there's not a big map, why are you even reading that book? I mean, I love worlds, I love maps, I love fantasy worlds, I love how authors create these things, and I enjoy exploring them, and I love some of my favorites. I just love coming back to again and again. So that's what we're going to talk about. My top 10 favorite fantasy worlds. Now, some of these on the list are going to be pure nostalgia picks, you know, just because these are worlds that I explored as a youngster, as I was reading fantasy books as a youngster. Some of these, and I just love going back to them, and they fill me with fondness every time I think of them. And then some of these are going to be books that just the authors created such vast fantasy worlds that were so detailed in every single way that you were just so immersed in it that you were just left standing in awe of the creation of this fantasy world. So this is going to be my list, and I've been reading, and I've been reading fantasy books for some 17,000 years now, and so I got a big library here that I've collected in my lifetime. So we've got a lot of books to choose from. A lot of fantasy books and a lot of fantasy worlds, and I've narrowed it down to my top 10. So, coming in my top 10 list of favorite fantasy worlds, coming in at number 10. No. I picked more than 10. I couldn't just do 10. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So we're going to call this my top 15 favorite fantasy worlds. So coming in at number 15 is Tad Williams' Shadowmarch series. Now, this series kind of gets overlooked a lot because of Tad Williams' much more popular Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series, but the world building in the Shadowmarch universe is every bit as detailed and elegant and complex as it was in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And we might just be seeing Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn popping up later on in this book rankings. So, Shadowmarch, it's very, very sword and sorcery heavy with just a touch of a little bit of steampunk to it, which gives it just a little extra flavor from the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Okay, so now the next one I'm going to show you is based purely off of my love of this series and my fondness for this series, because as I was a kid, you know, and that's the Shannara universe. I mean, I think that the world building is probably the most simplistic world building of all of the books that I'm going to show you and all of the fantasy worlds I'm going to show you. However, it was the very, 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 very first ever fantasy world I ever explored as a kid. This was The Sword of Shannara, was the first ever fantasy book I ever read, the first ever book I bought with my own money, of my own volition. And so it holds a very special place in my heart. And it's got a lovely map, which when I was a kid, this map meant a lot to me. I studied it. It's so simple compared to a lot of fantasies of today. But I studied this and studied this. I wanted to live in the world of Shannara back then. All right, let's go to And this is another kind of nostalgia pick too, because this was a fantasy world I explored as a kid that I enjoyed going back to, even though it was a little darker than Shannara. But that was the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, you know, and it's simply called The Land. And I know there's a map of it somewhere in here. I probably won't be. I should have marked the pages where the maps were. But this one's a little bit more detailed of a world than the Shannara. And I liked the just the Lord of the Rings type feel that this fantasy world presented to us, that Stephen Donaldson really gave us it was sort of an alternate dark Lord of the Rings type of thing. And I really, really enjoyed this fantasy world. Just the high magic, cool places and cool things and dramatic landscapes were presented to us all the time. Now let's go to a more modern one, which I think a lot of you will agree with on this. And I will tell you, this fantasy world by R. Scott Baker is just next level. This is on par with the world building of something like Dune. It's just astonishing. I think the maps are in the back. I can't remember. Like I said, I should have marked where these maps were. But anyway, we've got a map here of this fantasy world too. Actually, we've got a bunch of maps of this one. There's a lot of maps in this one, different things. But the R. Scott Baker, now, I've spoken to a lot of writers and agents and people in the literary field that consider this series to be on par with Frank Herbert's Dune as far as just the complexity of the world building, just the depth and complexity of it. And as you read it, you kind of get that sense. This is like genius level world building, to be honest with you. It's very dark, very grim, and a very brutal world to travel through. But I appreciate the here we go. Where are we at? That's number 15, 14, 13, 12. We are now to number 11. And I'm going to give this to Catherine Kurtz, the Direni series. I love this series, and I love traveling back to this world every time I pick up one of her books. It's kind of based on an alternate universe, England, Wales, Scotland type of a deal, where, and I'll show you the map here, which looks very English and Welsh, and all of the naming conventions on the map and stuff, all of the places that we visit in this world are kind of based off of Welsh legend and Welsh naming conventions and English naming conventions. And I like that. I like it when a lot of the fantasy worlds are sort of based in our own reality. And that's what Catherine Kurtz does with this. It's a very, very typical medieval European type sword and sorcery setting. And you feel like as you're wandering through the landscapes of the Direni world, you really feel like you're wandering through the Welsh countryside. It's really cool. And that you're visiting old Welsh cathedrals and old Welsh ruined castles. It's just dope. Alrighty then, let's talk about our top 10. We are to the top 10. And then we're going to get the top 10 started off with in high fashion. And that is with the Crown of Stars series by Kate Elliott. I think this is a 7-book series, and I don't think it's a 7-book series. I know it's a 7-book series. But I think that it has got one of the most detailed worlds ever created in fantasy. When we talk about the religions, the politics, the different races, how they all come together. The map is a little the map in the first book is a little weak, but there's more detailed maps in some of the later books. And this is another one like Catherine Kurtz that is based sort of in an alternate history European setting, which is very cool because you know when you're in Germany or the German, you know when you're in France and Italy, you know when her characters go to these different areas, you are pretty much grounded in the already established sort of cultures of Spain, England, Norway, all of that. But she names them all different things. And she does a great job of creating the world around it. Anyway, let's do This is just another one from my childhood that I adore so much, and that is Dragonlance World. Now the maps in these books are pretty limited. You really probably need to go buy Dungeons and Dragons games and modules about the Dragonlance world to get the real detailed maps. But the world creation, even though Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss wrote these novels, I think the world creation itself was done by a number of people at TSR and Dungeons and Dragons, and it was just like the Forgotten Realms. And then I could have probably thrown the Forgotten Realms into this group of world buildings, but I haven't read as many Forgotten Realms novels as I have Dragonlance novels. But the Dragonlance world of Wherein is just super, super cool. And like I said, the map, I won't show you the map in this one because it's not that great. The maps get better in later volumes. Number 9, and this is one of my favorite fantasy worlds of all time because it reminds me of my home state of Utah. And that is The Dragon Prince by Melanie Ron series. I mean, she's got 6 books in this series. And as you read this, you understand that it's set in a fantasy world that's similar to the Southwest, like Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, Southern California. Because we've got these beautiful desert landscapes juxtaposed with these high, lofty, rocky mountain type pine tree, ponderosa tree, aspen tree peaks and rivers and valleys. And so as these characters wander in and out of these areas that sometimes they're in the deserts, sometimes they're way up in the alpine mountains. It's absolutely fantastic. And I like this world building just simply for the fact, and there's a little map of it there too. I like this world simply because when I read these books, I just picture my own backyard. All right. This is one of the greatest fantasy worlds ever created that nobody knows about, and that is Dennis L. McKiernan's Mythgar. Now, Dennis L. McKiernan originally wrote his stories. He was kind of commissioned to write some sequels for Lord of the Rings. But then they never got published as such, and so he kept the stories, changed the names of the landscape, changed the name of the characters, and then published them under his own books. And he, instead of calling it Middle Earth, he called it Mythgar. And but it really is reminiscent of Middle Earth. And here's the map of the Mythgar. But if you want to read any books, if you love Lord of the Rings and you want to read something similar, you certainly want to, and you want to explore a world that's similar to Middle Earth, get Dennis L. McKiernan because it is absolutely wonderful. You feel like you were back in Middle Earth when you were reading a Dennis L. McKiernan book. All right, that is number 9. Number 8 on my list is the Stormlight Archive world of whatever it is, the Cosmere world, but oh my god, just the detail that these books give you of this world is astronomical. From the colored maps to the black and white maps to the small maps to the illustrations of the character Shallan, of all the creatures that inhabit this world. This is one of the best, most detailed and well-constructed fantasy worlds of all time, and it comes in at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think this is the 7th ranked. I don't know. I can't remember. 10, 8, 9, 8. I don't remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't remember what this is. 6? 6th. Yes, Jesus. Oh, my Lord. Running out of breath. Who knew that a top 10 world building video would make me winded? Getting old. Anyway, everybody knows about this. I don't need to really explain it anymore. My number 5. So we're to the top 5. Yes, top 5. And probably an even bigger, more Stormlight is one of the biggest, most massive worlds created in fantasy. But there's one bigger. Actually, yeah, there's one bigger. I think there's one bigger. And that is Stephen Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen world. If you've read these books, you know that this is an actual world. It's not just part of a world. It's not just a little corner of the world. But we've got dozens of maps of all parts of this world. You know, from Genabacchus to Capustan to all of the different places. I mean, there are so many maps in these books that it's you sometimes you just sit and try to piece all these maps together to see where all these characters are going and where they've been. And it is just one of the most large, that's not how you say that. It's one of the largest worlds, similar to Stormlight, but actually more detailed, I think. And it's huge, and it's dark, and it's grim, and it's brutal, and it's difficult to travel through, and it's got wild magics and crazy races of people and a lot of war and conflict. It's an absolute dynamic fantasy world, probably the biggest of any on my list. So now we are to number 4, and that is the Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time world. It is. Oh, I've put this on. The cover's on upside down. But the Wheel of Time world is a world that I would return to over and over. I bought this book when it first came out in the late 80s, and I followed the Wheel of Time series with each new book that came out. And so I was entering into this landscape every year for my whole life. And I just fell in love with the landscape that Robert Jordan had created, and it's so cool. And I cannot find the map, but everybody knows what the map looks like. I shall find it here soon. No, I won't. I'm lost. Trust me, there's a dope map in this book. Number 3, that would be another one from my main man, Tad Williams, and this is the Land of Austin Ard, which is where his Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy takes place, and it is one of my favorite. Clearly, it comes in at number 3. It's just such a wonderful fantasy world to visit every time. I love every single thing about it. Most especially, I love the fact that the way Tad Williams writes is so elegant and beautiful that he describes this world in ways that are unmatched. Again, I cannot find a map. Oh, there it is. The map is right there, and Tad Williams has signed all my books. I consider Tad one of my friends. There's the map of Austin Ard that Tad Williams drew himself. It's just Tad Williams' writing is what makes his world building so unique. And so if you love gorgeous writing, where everything just feels like poetry, and you're just getting all of this world building laid out for you like poetry, and it all seems so magical and beautiful, with a great story intertwined into that, then you need to get the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Number 2 on my list of my favorite world buildings is the World of Westeros that George R. Martin created. The World of Westeros. And look at the maps. There's maps everywhere in this. And it is just one of the most complex bit of world building that I have ever seen done. I mean, it's almost seamlessly perfect the way George R. Martin has created this world in which his characters inhabit. Not just down to the politics, the how dangerous the world is, how everything makes sense on the landscape. Another thing that I like about the way George R. Martin did this is the same with Catherine Kurtz, is all of the place names, like Winterfell or Lannisport or Old Town, they all feel like they really have a history. That the naming of the place has history. Just the name itself has history, and it speaks history. It's not just some made-up word. It's actually George R. Martin thought of this is a part of this landscape, and it has a history, and the name of it goes with its history. And like Sunspear, all of these things, it all makes so much sense. And I love when authors make sure that the name of their towns, because if you look around just the United States and stuff, I mean, you can or Canada or any place in the world, a lot of the places we've named because they're the history of the place. Anyway, I hope that made sense. Not only that, but this is a who would survive in Westeros? I know I probably would, but I'd have to change my personality a lot. I'd have to be a much meaner person. But I could do it. I could pull it off. I could survive in Westeros. I know a lot of my friends, they would die within 5 minutes. That's how medieval this place is. And you can tell that just because, the way that George R. R. Martin and the banners, everything is based around the banner and the theme of the house, like the theme of the clan and all of this stuff. It's almost like you've got all these rival teams fighting against each other. And it's just cool. Anyway, my number one world building novel, and I think it's not going to be a surprise at this point, but that is Lord of the Rings. I just feel at home every time I pick up these pages. Every time I crack open a Lord of the Rings novel to read it, whether it's The Hobbit or any parts of the trilogy or some of the histories of Middle-earth, any of that, I am immediately immersed into this ultimate. I mean, Tolkien is the king of fantasy for a reason, because the Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth are the quintessential fantasy universe that we all want to live in, that we would all, I don't know if we'd want to live there, but we'd like to visit. Or at least we'd like to, have a video game like Skyrim or Oblivion where we could adventure through it and explore every nook and cranny. I'm not a video game guy, but if they came out with a video game that was as detailed as Skyrim, but was about Middle-earth and had everything in Middle-earth, I would spend the rest of my life just walking through that. I would design my character. I would design my little Bilbo Baggins hobbit guy, and I would just wander. I wouldn't try to kill nothing or get any magic items. I would just go wide-eyed, like looking around. That would be so cool. But anyway, that's beside the point. Middle-earth is the single most greatest fantasy world ever created, bar none. There is none better. You cannot argue this fact. It just is. It is what it is. It's beautiful. It's rich in history. It's got everything that's good about the other 15 here behind me that I mentioned is compacted into this with an extra level of high magic and mythology and just mystical realism, and it speaks to everybody. I feel like in an alternate universe, this place actually exists. I really do.